expert who counsels clients on how not to sweat when you're in the hot seat. And he brought his hoop dreams from China to the U.S. What's next for Yao Ming after holding court for so long in the NBA? Hello and welcome to World Report. I'm Colleen McEdwards. The questions were at times pointed, the answers were often vague. Still, it is probably the pie in the face that people will remember most, as Rupert Murdoch and senior members of his media empire went before a committee of the British Parliament. Dan Rivers looks at Tuesday's testimony.
I would just like to say one sentence. This is the most humble day of my life.
This was how Rupert Murdoch started. But despite his apparent contrition, he surely had no idea what was about to literally hit him. In what should have been a secure hearing room, a personal attack on one of the world's most powerful media tycoons. His wife, Wendy, parrying a protester with a shaving cream pie who was off camera. As the police ran in, it was clear Mr. Murdoch was unhurt, and proceedings were suspended. Before that, Rupert Murdoch sought to distance himself from the news of the world, previously thought to be one of his favourite titles.
This is not as an excuse, maybe it's an explanation of my laxity. The news of the world is less than 1% of our company. I employ 53,000 people around the world who are proud and great and ethical and distinguished people.
One of them was sitting right beside him, his son James, whose apparent lack of knowledge of the detail of the phone hacking scandal at times seemed almost comical. Here, questioned about key documents that weren't initially handed over from News International's lawyers to the police.
Was Colin Myler aware of this evidence lying with the Harbottle and Lewis?
I cannot speak to other individuals' knowledge in the past. I simply don't.
And Tom Crone?
I simply, Mr. Farrelly, I can't speak for them.
And Stuart, that's a German pronunciation, sorry, Stuart Kuttner?
The same goes, Mr. Farrelly. I simply can't speak for them.
Critics would call this stonewalling, but James Murdoch was clear on one point.
First of all, I would like to say as well just how sorry I am and how sorry we are to particularly the victims of illegal voicemail interceptions and to their families.
At times, Rupert Murdoch appeared overwhelmed or perhaps unsure how to answer. Awkward silences following specific questions.
Mr. Murdoch, at what point did you find out that criminality was endemic at News of the World?
The overwhelming impression the Murdochs gave was of two men who were at best out of touch with what was happening in their company, at worst willfully ignorant, a phrase that was lost on James Murdoch.
Are you familiar with the term willful blindness?
Mr. Sanders, would you care to elaborate?
It is a term that came up in the Enron scandal, and willful blindness is a legal term. It states that if there is knowledge that you could have had and should have had but chose not to have, you are still responsible.
Mr. Sanders, do you have a question? Respectfully, I don't know what you'd like me to say.
Whether you were aware.
I'm not aware of that. I'm not aware of that particular phrase.
It was then the turn of Rebecca Brooks. She'd previously told the committee this.
We have paid the police for information in the past.
The same question again, but a different answer.
I can say that I have never paid a policeman myself. I've never sanctioned or knowingly sanctioned a payment to a police officer. I was referring, if you saw at the time of the Home Affairs Select Committee recently, that you'd have various crime editors from Fleet Street discussing that in the past payments have been made to police officers. I was referring to that wide-held belief, not widespread practice. And in fact, in my experience of dealing with the police, the information they give to newspapers comes free of charge.
But the scandal has come with an incredible cost to News International. A year ago, the name Murdoch put fear into the hearts of many British politicians. Today, it was clear the politicians had no fear. Dan Rivers, CNN, Westminster.
At another angle of this story, it is the last thing that London police need. They are already facing charges of corruption, and now their competence is being called into question as well. CNN producer Jonathan Wold was sitting behind Rupert Murdoch when that attack happened.
All of a sudden, somebody from the back of the room came to the front. At first thought, I thought he was trying to leave the room. He had a plastic bag, and he pulled out of the bag a polystyrene plate filled with, well, what I later found out, because enough of it fell on me, shaving foam, and he just plunged it into the face of Rupert Murdoch.
That's very nasty, and in the sense of it could have been a very nasty moment.
It could have been, as it
wasn't. I mean, shaving foam, but it could have been something else.
Absolutely. I think ultimately he wasn't hurt. He was more shocked, I think, as everybody was, but no one was seriously hurt.
Tell me about what Wendy Murdoch did, because we can see there, she's wearing the purple, and she almost, I mean, she launches herself and goes to give him a clout.
Yeah, I mean, her defence mechanisms, I think, were better than anyone else in the room, including the police officers. She jumped at the person who had attacked. I think even took a swing at him using the plate that the attacker used to strike Murdoch.
Jonathan Wold and our Richard Quest there about what some are calling a major security breach. Nobody happy about that happening at all. Let's get more now on the grilling that actually happened before these members of Parliament in this parliamentary committee. Let's go to London. Senior international correspondent Matthew Chance is standing by there with more. You know, I don't think we can underestimate, Matthew, just how powerful the Murdoch family is in the UK and how big a deal this is.
No, absolutely. Of course, Rupert Murdoch, perhaps the most powerful media mogul in the world today. And so that made it all the more incredible, in my opinion, to see him sitting in front of a select committee of British parliamentarians like this and face this intensive questioning. This hasn't happened for 40 years, not since Rupert Murdoch got into the media business, virtually, has he submitted himself to this kind of parliamentary scrutiny in this country. He very rarely gives interviews, in fact, and so it was quite astonishing to see this media baron sitting there answering these questions. He said for himself it was the humblest day of his life, sitting there in front of these politicians having to answer their questions. So I think that shows, Colleen, just how just what an impact this scandal, this phone hacking scandal has had, I suppose, on the sort of aura of power that has, up until now, surrounded and to some extent protected Rupert Murdoch.
Indeed. But what did we actually learn about what was going on inside the company at the newspapers? What did we actually learn that we didn't know before?
Well, it's a difficult question to answer, but I mean, I guess what we learned was that if we believe that the testimony of the two Murdochs in particular, was that, you know, these senior officials in News Corporation, in News International, were not really in control of the day-to-day happenings at a newspaper as important as the News of the World. Remember, the News of the World is the biggest selling Sunday newspaper in Britain, and the defence used by both Rupert and James Murdoch was very much, you know, that it was a hands-off kind of defence. That, you know, it says, I think Rupert Murdoch said that, you know, he employs 53,000 people, that the News of the World represents just 1% of his media empire, and he couldn't possibly know what the vast majority of these people were up to. And so that was the defence. I think for me personally, I felt that was at odds with the kind of way in which I see news organisations working in the ones that I've worked at, which is that if you're working on a big story and, you know, it's an important story, one which the paper or the television company cares about, then inevitably every boss in the company knows all about it and knows exactly how you got it and exactly what your sources were. So I think there's a sort of gap between their testimony and you know, kind of what the reality may be.
Just real quick, Matthew, where does this process go on from here? Is there more, and if so, what?
Well, there could be further questions, obviously, from the Select Committee, but the big event coming up, of course, is the parliamentary session tomorrow, which David Cameron has cut short his trip from Africa from 5 days down to a day and a half to come back and convene this extraordinary session of Parliament to discuss this issue. And, of course, pressure still remains very much on the British Prime Minister because he is the politician, of course, who hired Andy Coulson, the former editor of the News of the World, as his director of media, knowing full well that this phone hacking scandal was hanging over him. And so there are big questions over the judgment of David Cameron in making such a hire. And there have been calls over the course of the past 24 hours or so, particularly 48 hours, amongst backbenchers at least, for David Cameron to step down. There's no sign of that at the moment, but certainly the Prime Minister's under pressure.
Yeah. All right, Matthew Chancellor for us in London. Matthew, thanks so much. Appreciate it. Let's get back now to what was going on inside that committee room. We've put much of the emphasis on the senior Murdoch, of course, but the spotlight was also very much on his son, young James, not yet 40. Just who is he? Well, at Times Tuesday, the younger Murdoch appeared to have a little egg on his face. He could answer few questions in detail. He's 38 years old, the third child from his father's second marriage. He was born in London. He was raised in New York. James Murdoch attended Harvard, but he dropped out before graduation. He wanted to help launch a hip-hop record label, seen as a little bit of a rebel at that time. Then in 1996, he entered the family business. 4 years later, he was in charge of Star TV, the company's Asian satellite business. In 2003, he took the reins of UK-based Sky TV. James Murdoch took control of News International in 2007. And we're going to have much more in the story coming up, including the testimony by a member of Parliament. CNN's Piers Morgan says she has got things wrong and he is going to respond. Morgan says he's been a hacking victim. We'll have his rebuttal when we come back. Also ahead, U.S. stocks have their best day of the year so far. We're going to tell you why investors are in such a buying mood, at least at the moment. And risking life and limb to cross a remote Latin American border. We've got the story just ahead, right here on CNN.
Truly Vivid by Super AMOLED Plus. Samsung Galaxy S2.
Your world up to the minute with CNN's Aisha Sasay. When we know it, you'll know it. International Desk, tonight, only on CNN.
We're not confined to a particular country, and with that, we're not confined to one viewpoint or one culture or one language. We are a global network.
A wall of water 39 meters high, racing inland 5 kilometers. See how people escaped and hear first-hand accounts. Surviving the tsunami on CNN.
Global Business Report is sponsored by Cathay Pacific Airways.
Stocks rebounded Tuesday following some strong corporate data and a solid report on new home construction in the U.S. President Obama's comments on progress in the U.S. budget talks also helped. The Dow Industrial surged 202 points, closing at 12,587, its best one-day point gain this year. IBM was the standout gainer, up more than 5% following a strong earnings report. That sparked a rally in the tech-heavy NASDAQ. It jumped more than 2%, and the S&P 500 rose 1 2/3%. Shares of News Corp were among the big winners. The stock gained 5.5% as executives were grilled in Parliament in London. But the stock is still down substantially since the scandal broke on July 5th. On the earnings front, Bank of America suffered a whopping $8.8 billion quarterly loss, but that's directly related to a settlement it made with several investors regarding losses from mortgage-backed securities. Without that huge charge, the bank would have posted a $3 billion profit. But its shares slid Tuesday, hitting a new two-year low. Goldman Sachs disappointed investors as well, making just $1.1 billion in the second quarter. Coming up Wednesday, the earnings barrage continues. We'll get results from Dow members United Technologies, Intel, and American Express. And the latest reading on sales of existing homes is also due. That's a wrap of the day on Wall Street. I'm Allison Kosick in New York.
All right, well, let's get a look at some of the other business stories that we are following as well. Apple continues its amazing ride. That is, of course, thanks to sales of iPhones and, of course, the iPad as well. After the closing bell, the world's largest tech company posted a quarterly profit. Listen to this, almost $7.5 billion quarterly profit. That's more than double what it made in the same period last year. The IMF warns the European debt crisis poses a significant risk to the global economy. The fund says unresolved fiscal problems in Ireland, Portugal, and Greece still has a chance of spreading to other countries. European leaders set to meet Thursday. They're going to try to talk about some terms of that second bailout that is on tap for Greece. China's premier search engine has made a deal that will change the way the country gets its online music. Baidu has signed a licensing agreement with 3 of the world's largest music companies, I should say. It's going to allow China's 450 million web users access to hundreds of thousands of free songs. Baidu had been accused of providing a market for pirated music. We are going to be back in just a moment. But first, a check of the only Asia-Pacific market that is open just yet, and that is the one in New Zealand. Here's how we look. Back in a moment.
Global Business Report is sponsored by Cathay Pacific Airways.
Can a bank really stand for something? Can it balance its ambition with its conscience? As not everything in life that counts can be counted. In the many places we call home, our purpose remains the same. To be here for people, here for progress, here for the long run, here for good.
It's time to put traffickers out of business.
Join me, Anil Kapoor, and CNN in the fight to end modern-day slavery.
As long as they can't walk away, neither will we.
Together, we can give victims a voice.
The CNN Freedom Project.
Rupert Murdoch and his son James entered a parliamentary committee room in London today to face allegations from the phone hacking scandal, a day the media mogul himself called humbling, and one with many surprises for the people who were there to watch these proceedings unfold. In fact, the hearing had ramifications for media figures beyond the Murdochs as well. The name of one of CNN's own anchors did come up, and our Wolf Blitzer spoke with Louise Mensch. She's a Conservative member of Parliament. Listen to this.
Mrs. Mensch, you caused quite a stir when you asked this question, when you made the statement about our colleague here at CNN, Piers Morgan. I'm going to play what you said in Parliament today. Listen to this.
Piers Morgan, who is now a celebrity anchor at CNN, who do not appear to have asked him any questions at all about phone hacking, as a former editor of the Daily Mirror. He said in his book, The Insider, recently, and I quote, that the little trick of entering a standard 4-digit code allow anyone to call a number and hear all your messages. In that book, he boasted that using that little trick enables him to win Scoop of the Year on a story about Sven-Göran Eriksson. So that is a former editor of the Daily Mirror being very open about his personal use of phone hacking.
All right, what evidence do you have to make that kind of accusation against Piers Morgan?
Well, I said what I said in the committee, Wolf, and I'm afraid right now I'm going to say that I can't comment about it outside of the committee room because, as Mr. Morgan will know, inside Parliament, when I speak at a select committee of Parliament, I am protected by absolute parliamentary privilege. To repeat something outside of Parliament doesn't give me that cloak of privilege, and Mr. Morgan is a very rich man. So I am sure that the ferocious investigative journalists at CNN and across the news media in the United States will take careful note of what was said in the committee and look into it. That's the best I'm afraid I'm going to be able to do on legal grounds.
Well, I understand the legal grounds. Piers Morgan is joining us on the phone right now. I want to give him a chance to respond to that very direct allegation you made against him and his reputation. Piers, go ahead and respond. Tell Mrs. Mensch what you think.
Well, I'm amused by her cowardice in refusing to repeat that allegation now she's not in Parliament and covered by privilege. As she may be already aware, she came out with an absolute blatant lie during those proceedings. At no stage in my book, or indeed outside of my book, have I ever boasted of using phone hacking for any stories. For the record, in my time at the Mirror and the News of the World, I have never hacked a phone, told anybody to hack a phone, or published any story based on the hacking of a phone. And what she did today was a deliberate, in my view, and outrageous attempt to smear my name, CNN's name, the Daily Mirror's name, and I think her now to have the breathtaking gall to just sit here calmly and say, I can't possibly repeat that because I haven't got privilege, is an outrage. And I call on you, Ms. Mensch, now to repeat it, show some balls, repeat what you said about me, and then maybe go and buy a copy of my book, The Insider, and see where in that book these claims that you made today in a televised committee watched all over the world, where that claim is in that book, because it isn't there.
All right, Mrs. Mensch, do you want to respond to that?
As I've just said, I made the claims in the Select Committee and people will look at them.
Yeah, so that was the exchange right there. She did not respond without the parliamentary protection inside that committee. And it didn't stop there. Wolf Blitzer, as you could tell, had Piers Morgan on his guest to give him the chance to respond, to give Ms. Mensch a chance to flesh out the allegations. It went on a little bit from there, point by point, really. Piers Morgan saying that Mensch got it wrong and talked also about some of the broader issues that were raised at the hearing. Listen to this.
She made some very specific claims, and in fact, later on, she repeated them, even down to me apparently giving tutorials in phone hacking, how I'd hacked people myself, how my staff had broken stories of phone hacking, and she has absolutely no evidence for any of this, and she based it on what she claimed I had published in my own volume of diaries. Well, you've seen the entries now, Wolf, and I read the entries to her earlier. There is no such thing. The only entry in my book referring to phone hacking was when somebody warned me that my phone might be being hacked and advised me to change my PIN number. So I was pretty outraged, actually. I think when somebody makes such a claim against your own integrity and does it based on a complete falsehood and then hides behind parliamentary privilege, I think your viewers will find rather mysterious entity, or a politician in Britain can say anything they like, and you can't sue them. Not that I would anyway, but you can't sue them. I think it's pretty rich when she now knows, or she must know, having now seen the book, presumably, that none of these things she says that I wrote actually exist in the book.
Let's talk about the bigger picture right now. What did you think of this hearing, this testimony today? You know the Murdochs. You worked for them at one point in your life. What did you come away with?
Well, a most extraordinary spectacle. I watched all of it. I've known Rupert and James Murdoch for a very long time. Rupert Murdoch made me one of the youngest editors in Fleet Street history in Britain when I was 28 years old. I owe him a lot. You know, I wouldn't probably be here without his help. I also know Rebekah Brooks very well, one of my oldest friends. And, you know, I'm proud to be their friends. I felt it was a very tough day for them. I thought the outrageous attack on Rupert Murdoch by that protester should never have been allowed to happen. I think it's a scandal that it did. But he dusted himself down, as you'd expect. He'd got some pretty tough questions. I thought some of the MPs landed a few blows. My summation of the thing was that nobody proved to, I don't think, any neutral observer that Rupert Murdoch had any personal knowledge of what was going on with his phone hacking, or James Murdoch, for that matter, or Rebekah Brooks. What you have seen are clearly management failings and how they controlled this story from when it first came up, and I think they would accept that. Clearly, this was a much bigger problem than they realised, and I think if Rupert Murdoch had his time again, he would have got stuck into this personally early on and made sure that appropriate action was taken. It's been very damaging for the Murdoch family, for the corporation, but at the end of the day, money talks. I think that the stock price of News Corp rose 6% today, so clearly the markets believe that no death charge blow was landed, except possibly by Wendy Deng.
How much pressure were you under when you edited these newspapers in London to get the scoop, to get the big story, and to do whatever it took to get that story?
Huge pressure, and I detail that in my book as well. You know, when you're an editor of a British tabloid newspaper, you're in a commercial war, and you're encouraged to be aggressive, to be forceful, to pursue stories with the full might of your reporting army. But most news organisations are the same. Rupert Murdoch's happened to have been more successful than most over the years. The key thing for me was listening to Murdoch today. A lot of what he said resonated, and people may be bemused by what he said and not believe him. But when he says that, you know, he didn't have much day-to-day contact with these papers, that's true. I spoke to an editor of the News of the World maybe once a week, maybe once every 2 weeks. He never asked me about methodology of stories. He didn't have time. He would just say, what's going on? And you'd tell him what stories you had, and he would be, I'm sure, in a position where he thought, I have editors, I have managers, I have lawyers, I have accountants. They do all the box ticking here. My job is just to get an overview of what's going on. And I think when you run a company of 50,000 people, it is a bit ridiculous to expect Rupert Murdoch to be all over the micro detail of how each individual part of these companies gets run. As he said, you know, he may have been let down by other people that he charged to look after this detail. And big mistakes were made. And when it came to the phone hacking of the young missing girl and so on, utter outrages. And everybody shares that view.
Keep it right here on CNN. Piers Morgan is going to have more on these accusations. It is all coming your way in about 90 minutes. All right, let's get you a check of the latest weather. We got Jenny Harrison standing by at the International Weather Center with that. Jenny, what is going on?
Well, I'm going to start out with Japan, actually, Colleen, because we are still watching very closely Typhoon Mayon. It did for a while fall back down in strength, so it became a tropical storm, but this is it. Massive amount of cloud you can see continuing to spin across those eastern sections of eastern Honshu. You can see here a little bit closer. You can see also it begins to look as if it loses a little bit of circulation, but I have to say it actually doesn't do that. It's just that it, as you can see, moves onwards on the satellite. Look at the amounts of rain in the last 24 hours just to this western region of Japan. 380 millimetres of rain, and there is more to come. Now, the winds, as I say, right now it is at typhoon strength, so they're sustained at 120 kilometres an hour. Then we might see some weakening. Then we could see a little bit more strengthening. So it's a little bit uncertain right now, but what we do know is that it's continuing to move its journey eastwards, and that means eventually it's coming offshore. You can see here on the wind forecast that it's going to work its way eastwards, and then you can see continue to pull eastwards over the next 48 hours. So taking with it the strongest of the winds, also taking with it the heaviest of the rains. It'll be another probably 24 hours though before the system has well and truly cleared eastern regions of Japan, and before it does that, we're looking at about maybe 60 millimetres of rain at most there into Tokyo. Some of that rain working its way northwards up towards Sendai, but not a huge amount, maybe 20 millimetres at most up there. There are also two tropical storms out there. This one, first of all, in the Atlantic, well to the east of Florida, and also well to the north now of the Bahamas, and it should stay to the northwest of Bermuda, and as you can see here, well to the east of the east coast of the United States. So pretty good storm, this one, 83 kilometres an hour right now, and it will continue to weaken as it heads northwards, and it shouldn't really have any problems there for Bermuda. It's so far enough away and not really strong enough to. Maybe just some strong waves at times and a little bit of rain. But this is the other system. We're now in the eastern Pacific, and here we've got, of course, the west coast of Mexico. And this is the progress of this particular storm. Winds continuing to strengthen here as well. So this expected to become a hurricane in the next 24 hours, but it should continue to move just about parallel to the west coast, not actually come on shore. Pretty much all of the different reporting models there, computer models, are in agreement with the actual forecast track. And you can see here the actual rain forecast the next couple of days. It should stay mostly offshore, but it will be pulling in quite a lot of moisture from the eastern Pacific. So we will see quite a bit of rain across that western portion of Mexico. Colleen.
Jenny, thanks very much. It was a grueling day of testimony for media mogul Rupert Murdoch and his son. We know what they said about the phone hacking scandal, but how well did they say it? We're going to talk to a crisis management expert. Should be an interesting conversation. Stay with us. We're coming right back.
Uncut,
He has no authority to push us out of here.
Unscripted.
We started in a car, then we got a boat, now we're in a tractor, 3 different vehicles to try to tell you the story.
Unexpected.
The air up here is really thin. It's difficult to breathe.
It's an unconventional look and a different point of view to help you understand the whole story.
Go beyond what you normally see on the news.
Backstory.